In a forgotten corner of the world, where the sun rarely pierced the heavy clouds, a dilapidated house stood like a ghost of its former self. The paint peeled off the walls, revealing the bare wood beneath, and the windows, obscured by grime and neglect, were like eyes long since closed to the world. Inside, the air was thick with the stench that clung to the walls and seeped into the very fibers of the floor. It was a stench of decay, of despair, and of lives that had once held promise, but had since been reduced to mere shadows of existence. In the dim light, a group of animals huddled together, their bodies frail and trembling. They were a motley crew, a mix of dogs and cats, their fur matted, their ribs protruding sharply against their skin. They had once been cherished companions, but now they were little more than remnants of a happier time, starved and locked up in their own waste. Their eyes, once bright with curiosity and love, now held a dullness that spoke of suffering and neglect. They had become a burden, a liability to the one who had once vowed to care for them. The owner, a figure who had once seemed so full of life and promise, had succumbed to a darkness that enveloped not only their spirit but also the lives of those they had brought into their home. The initial excitement of adopting pets had faded, replaced by the weight of responsibility that felt more like an anchor than a blessing. What had begun as an act of love had devolved into a cycle of apathy and denial. The animals, once a source of joy, had become a reminder of failure, a testament to the owner's inability to cope with the demands of care. Each day, the owner would glance at the door of the room where the animals were confined, their cries muffled by the walls that had become their prison. The owner would feel a pang of guilt, a fleeting moment of recognition that something was terribly wrong. But guilt was a slippery emotion, easily suppressed by the harsh realities of life. Bills piled up, relationships frayed, and the weight of isolation pressed down like a heavy blanket. The animals, in their desperate need for attention and care, became an unbearable reminder of everything the owner could not face. In moments of clarity, the owner would remember the joy of a wagging tail, the soft purring of a cat curled up in their lap. But those memories were often drowned out by the chaos of life, the overwhelming tide of responsibilities that seemed to swell with each passing day. The animals, once vibrant and full of life, were now just another reminder of the burdens that had become too heavy to bear. As the days turned into weeks, the owner's thoughts shifted from guilt to a more chilling realization. The animals were not just neglected, they were a burden that needed to be dealt with. In a moment of cold calculation, the owner began to consider the options. What if they simply disappeared? What if they could be rid of the mess, the cries, the constant reminder of their failure? The thought was both horrifying and oddly liberating. It was a solution that offered an escape, a way to reclaim a sense of control over a life that felt spiraled out of control. The owner began to plot, envisioning a way to rid themselves of the burden without facing the consequences of their actions. Perhaps a shelter would take them, or maybe a kind-hearted stranger would come along and offer them a new home. The owner convinced themselves that it was for the best, that the animals would be better off without them. In their mind, they crafted a narrative where they were the hero, the one who made the hard choice for the sake of the creatures they had once loved. But deep down, a flicker of doubt remained. The owner would often find themselves staring into the eyes of the animals, seeing the flicker of hope that still resided there, a hope that perhaps tomorrow would be different. They would see the way the dogs wagged their tails in a futile attempt to elicit affection, the way the cats would nuzzle against the door, longing for a touch, for a sign that they were not forgotten. It was a reminder that, despite the neglect, the love that had once existed still flickered like a candle in the darkness. In those moments, the owner would feel the weight of their decision pressing down like a leaden cloak. They would find themselves torn between the desire to escape the burden and the instinct to protect those who depended on them. The struggle played out in their mind like a twisted game, a battle between self-preservation and the remnants of compassion that still lingered beneath the surface. As the days turned into a blur of indecision, the owner found themselves at a crossroads. The burden had become too heavy to bear, Yet the thought of abandoning the animals felt like a betrayal of everything they had once promised. The realization dawned that the true burden was not the animals themselves, but the choices that had led to this moment. It was a reckoning, a confrontation with the reality of their own shortcomings. In the end, the owner stood before the door, the cries of the animals echoing in their ears. They could no longer ignore the truth. The burden was not the animals. It was the refusal to face the consequences of their actions. With a deep breath, they reached for the doorknob, ready to confront the chaos they had allowed to fester. In that moment, they understood that love was not just a feeling, but a commitment, a promise to stand by those who relied on them, even when the weight felt unbearable. The door creaked open and the animals rushed forward, a wave of fur and warmth that enveloped the owner. They were not just a burden. They were a reminder of resilience, of the capacity to change, to grow, to love, despite the scars of neglect. In that moment, the owner chose to embrace the chaos, to face the mess head-on, and to reclaim the love that had once brought them together. It was a choice that would not erase the past, but would pave the way for a future filled with hope, healing, and the promise of redemption.